The fluorescent lights of the cramped apartment flickered intermittently, casting harsh shadows across Marcus Chen's weathered face as he hunched over his aging laptop. His calloused fingers, stained with motor oil from 12-hour shifts at the auto repair shop, trembled slightly as he filled out the online loan application. The kitchen table, scarred with years of use, held scattered bills marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters. His nephew Danny's college acceptance letter lay beneath them, the pristine white paper a stark contrast to the chaos of unpaid debts. Marcus paused, his dark eyes reflecting the computer screen's glow, unaware that the simple click of "Submit" would reconnect him with a past he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. The silence of his small world was about to be shattered by a voice he never expected to hear again. Marcus had always been the overlooked one, the younger stepson who faded into the background when his father remarried wealthy socialite Victoria Ashworth. At 38, his lean frame bore the evidence of a life spent working with his hands rather than sitting in boardrooms. His black hair, now streaked with premature silver, was always slightly disheveled from crawling under car hoods. The deep lines around his eyes spoke of countless nights spent worrying about making ends meet, especially since his sister Sarah had died in that car accident 3 years ago, leaving him as Danny's sole guardian. The boy meant everything to Marcus now. Danny, now 18 with his mother's gentle smile and his uncle's determined spirit, had earned a full scholarship to MIT, but the living expenses and books would cost nearly $20,000 that Marcus simply didn't have. The auto shop where Marcus worked as head mechanic paid barely enough to cover their modest rent and groceries. He'd already sold his father's vintage watch and his sister's jewelry, everything of value except the faded family photographs that lined their small living room. When Danny had quietly offered to defer college for a year to work and save money, Marcus had firmly refused, his voice thick with emotion as he promised to find a way. The phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. the next Tuesday, its shrill tone cutting through the steady rhythm of Marcus tightening bolts on a transmission. He wiped his greasy hands on his coveralls before answering, expecting another debt collector or telemarketer. Instead, a crisp, professional voice spoke his name with an authority that made his stomach clench. "Mr. Chan? This is Victoria Ashworth from Ashworth Private Banking. I'm calling regarding your loan application." The wrench slipped from Marcus's grip, clattering to the concrete floor. He hadn't heard that voice in 15 years. Not since the bitter reading of his father's will when she'd made it clear that the family fortune would remain firmly in her control. Her tone was measured, businesslike, giving no indication that she recognized his name or remembered the awkward, grieving stepson who'd once lived in her pristine mansion. Marcus found his voice after a moment, his throat suddenly dry. I didn't know you owned a bank." Victoria's soft laugh held no warmth. "I own many things, Marcus. We need to discuss your application in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 3? Marcus stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror the next morning, attempting to tame his unruly hair and wondering if his one good shirt would be acceptable for Victoria's world of marble and mahogany. The decision to meet her hadn't been easy. Every instinct told him to decline, to find another way, but Danny's future hung in the balance. His nephew had noticed his distraction the night before, those perceptive brown eyes studying Marcus over their dinner of leftover pizza. "Uncle Marcus, you don't have to do this for me," Danny had said quietly, his voice mature beyond his 18 years. "I can take out student loans, work part-time." But Marcus had shaken his head firmly, remembering his own dreams that had been deferred and eventually abandoned when his father's support had vanished along with his inheritance. "Your mom would have wanted you to have every opportunity," he'd replied, his voice catching slightly. "She always said you were destined for great things." Now, straightening his tie with hands that still smelled faintly of motor oil despite vigorous scrubbing, Marcus whispered a prayer for strength and headed toward a confrontation 15 years in the making. The Ashworth Private Banking building rose 30 stories into the Seattle sky, its glass and steel facade reflecting the gray clouds that perpetually hung over the city. Marcus felt small and out of place as he crossed the marble lobby, his worn dress shoes clicking softly against the polished stone. The elevator carried him to the 28th floor in whispered silence, opening to reveal a reception area that screamed understated wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over Persian rugs and oil paintings that probably cost more than Marcus made in a year. Victoria's assistant, a perfectly groomed woman in her 30s, led him through double doors into an office that took his breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, while Victoria herself stood silhouetted against the gray water, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She'd aged gracefully, her 62 years evident only in the fine lines around her ice-blue eyes and the careful way she moved. Her navy suit probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, and when she turned to face him, her expression was unreadable. "Marcus," she said simply, gesturing to a leather chair that probably cost more than his car. "You look different." He settled uncomfortably into the chair, acutely aware of how his modest appearance contrasted with the opulent surroundings. "It's been a long time, Victoria." The tension in the room was palpable as Victoria moved to her desk, a massive piece of carved walnut that dominated the space. She opened a file folder with Marcus's name on it, her manicured fingers tracing the pages as she spoke. $20,000 for your nephew's college expenses. That's quite a sum for someone with your financial history. Her words stung, but Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Danny's a good kid. He deserves a chance." Victoria's laugh was sharp, brittle. "A chance? Like the chance your father gave me when he married me for my money and connections? Or the chance he gave you and your sister when he left you each a small trust fund while leaving me to manage the bulk of his estate?" The old wounds reopened instantly, 15 years of resentment and hurt flooding back. Marcus remembered the shocked silence in the lawyer's office when the will was read, how Victoria's face had remained perfectly composed while he and Sarah had exchanged bewildered glances. "He loved you," Marcus said quietly. "Whatever his reasons were for the will, he genuinely cared about you." Victoria's facade cracked for just a moment, a flash of vulnerability crossing her features before she regained her composure. "Love?" she repeated, the word heavy with skepticism. "Is that what you call it when someone marries you 3 months after meeting you, right after your first husband's death left you with a substantial fortune?" The conversation took an unexpected turn as Victoria moved to the window, her back to Marcus as she spoke. "Do you know what it's like to wonder every day if someone truly cares about you, or if they're just waiting for you to die so they can inherit your money?" Her voice was softer now, tinged with a loneliness that Marcus had never heard before. "Your father was kind to me, yes, but I always wondered, if I hadn't been wealthy, would he have looked at me twice?" Marcus felt a stab of empathy for this woman he'd resented for so many years. "He talked about you all the time," he said honestly. "Even before he got sick. He'd light up when he mentioned something funny you'd said, or how you'd rearranged the garden. That wasn't about money, Victoria. That was about you." She turned back to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "After he died, I was so angry. At him for leaving me, at you and Sarah for having his love so effortlessly, at myself for caring so much. I know I wasn't kind to either of you during that time." Marcus remembered the cold efficiency with which she'd handled the funeral arrangements, the way she'd avoided eye contact during the reception, how she'd made it clear that their childhood home was now hers alone. "We were all grieving," he said carefully. A crisis interrupted their tentative moment of understanding when Victoria's assistant burst through the doors, her usual composure shattered. "Mrs. Ashworth, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's been an incident at the Belltown branch. Someone tried to rob it and they're saying one of the employees might have been hurt." Victoria's face went pale as she reached for her phone, her hands shaking slightly as she dialed. Marcus watched her transformation from composed businesswoman to genuinely frightened human being as she spoke rapidly to someone on the other end. When she hung up, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's Janet Morrison. She's been with the bank for 12 years, has 3 children. They've taken her to Harborview." Without thinking, Marcus stood up. "I'll drive you." Victoria looked at him in surprise. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Marcus said firmly, remembering his sister's accident, the terrible wait in hospital corridors, The way time seemed to stretch endlessly when someone you cared about was hurt. No one should face that alone. The drive to the hospital was tense. Victoria's usual composure completely shattered as she made call after call, arranging for Janet's family to be notified, ensuring her medical bills would be covered, coordinating with the police. Marcus navigated the Seattle traffic with practiced ease. Occasionally glancing at this woman he was seeing clearly for the first time. The transformation in Victoria over the following days was remarkable to witness. Marcus found himself returning to the hospital each evening after work, initially to check on Janet's recovery, but increasingly to spend time with Victoria, who had barely left the waiting room. She'd shed her designer suits for comfortable clothes, her perfectly styled hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal. She looked younger somehow, more human. Janet, thankfully, had suffered only minor injuries, but the incident had shaken Victoria profoundly. "I keep thinking about her children," she confided to Marcus one evening as they sat in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee and stale sandwiches. "What if something had happened to her? What if I hadn't been there to make sure she got the best care?" Marcus studied her profile, noting the genuine concern in her voice. "You can't protect everyone from everything," he said gently. "But you did everything you could. That matters." Victoria looked at him with something like surprise. "When did you become so wise?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Probably around the time I became responsible for an 18-year-old who's smarter than I am." Their conversation was interrupted by Janet's eldest daughter, a girl about Danny's age, who approached their table shyly. "Mrs. Ashworth? Mom wanted me to thank you again for everything. The flowers, the private room, making sure Dad could take time off work." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she hugged the girl impulsively. In the weeks that followed, Marcus found himself drawn into Victoria's world in ways he'd never expected. She began joining him for coffee after their hospital visits, their conversations ranging from memories of his father to their hopes for the future. She spoke about the loneliness of wealth, how it created barriers between her and genuine human connection. Marcus shared his struggles as a single guardian, his fears about failing Danny the way he felt he'd failed his sister by not being there the night of her accident. They discovered shared interests in old movies and mystery novels, laughed over Victoria's attempts to learn basic car maintenance from Marcus, and found comfort in each other's company during the long Seattle winter evenings. Victoria began visiting Marcus's modest apartment, initially to meet Danny, but eventually because she genuinely enjoyed the warmth and authenticity of their simple life. She marveled at the way Danny and Marcus bantered over dinner, the easy affection between them, the way they made decisions together as a family. "I'd forgotten what this felt like," she admitted one evening as they watched Danny work on a physics problem at the kitchen table. "What?" Marcus asked. "Belonging somewhere," she replied softly. Danny looked up from his homework, his young face serious. "You belong here if you want to," he said simply, and Victoria's eyes filled with tears. The evolution of their relationship was gradual but unmistakable. Victoria began spending weekends at Marcus's apartment, cooking elaborate meals in his tiny kitchen and laughing when they inevitably ordered pizza instead. She attended Danny's high school graduation, tears streaming down her face as he walked across the stage. Marcus found himself looking forward to her calls during his workdays, the way she'd ask about his customers and listen with genuine interest to his stories about rebuilt engines and difficult repairs. She started learning about cars, her expensive manicures gradually giving way to practical short nails, as she insisted on helping Marcus with weekend projects. Their first kiss happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in April, as they stood on Marcus's fire escape, watching the city lights blur through the raindrops on the windows. It was tentative at first, 15 years of complicated history hanging between them, but when Victoria pulled back to look into his eyes, Marcus saw something he'd never seen before: complete vulnerability and trust. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she whispered. "About anyone." Marcus cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I know I'm not what you're used to," he began, but she silenced him with another kiss. "You're exactly what I need," she said firmly. The proposal came exactly 1 year after that first phone call about the loan, which had long since been approved and repaid through Victoria's quiet arrangement of a high-paying consulting position for Marcus at one of her automotive investments. They were back in her office, but this time Marcus wore a suit that fit properly, and Victoria's smile was genuine as she handed him an envelope. "What's this?" he asked, recognizing the bank's letterhead. "Danny's graduate school funding," she said casually. "MIT accepted him into their doctoral program, and I thought—" She trailed off as Marcus set the envelope aside and dropped to one knee, producing a simple but elegant ring he'd been carrying for weeks. "Victoria Ashworth," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me and Danny more than we ever dreamed possible, but more than that, you've given us yourself. Will you marry me?" The office fell silent except for the soft sound of Victoria's tears hitting the Persian rug. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, Victoria laughed through her tears. "I suppose this means I'll have to learn to change my own oil." "I'll teach you," Marcus promised, pulling her into his arms. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle stretched out below them, the city that had witnessed their complicated past and would now be home to their future together. Sometimes the most unexpected phone calls change everything. A loan application meant to secure one future ended up creating an entirely different one, proving that second chances and forgiveness can transform not just individual lives, but the very definition of family itself. In a world where wealth and status often divide us, Marcus and Victoria discovered that love, understanding, and genuine connection remain the most valuable currencies of all.